Ben, Mike from Niagara County. Can you talk a bit about the jobs, the R&D component especially in your operation?
Absolutely. So we have in our R&D lab, we have just acquired a HPLC, which is a liquid chromatography machine. We have a cannabis analyzer, and then we are setting up a production line to make tinctures, capsules, and for an extraction. And we're not a huge operation, but that operation alone is hiring 7 people at $60,000 plus. And then on the field, to grow 20 acres this past year, it was like, I have a past in organic vegetables and then grains, but this is much more like vegetables. You're hiring a couple people per acre for harvest. For caring for the crops, we carried a crew through our crop season of about 6 people, and then once we got to harvest and breakdown, we had a push crew of around 25 or 30. And then, so it creates a lot more jobs than large-scale grain or dairy farming now does, where I run a couple thousand acres of grain with a crew of 3. To do 20 acres of hemp, and all the components of the business, it's like 30 people. So it creates a lot of work. And there's, like many industries, our lower tier is $15 an hour, and the higher tier it's like most, our lab manager, I'm not gonna say exactly what she makes, but it's pretty good. So I think that's the way to look at it, is you're looking at something that has a scale of many types of jobs. But a key thing to look at as counties too is similar to our fruit and vegetable industry. A lot of the key work for harvest and drying is seasonal. So the mess we have with immigration and our H-2A programs not functioning as they should is likely to affect hemp as well. I believe now that hemp has been legalized at the federal level, you can apply for H-2A agricultural workers to help get the work done. I imagine many folks in rural counties do have trouble with the labor pool, but that's something we've encountered.
Okay, let's go over here, and then we'll go to Paul from Orange County.
Thank you very much. Rebecca Edwards from Dutchess County. And I have a question really for all the panelists. A friend of mine who's got a chronic disability does have a medical marijuana prescription. And when her doctor gave her that, she said, when you go to the dispensary, they'll be able to give you some guidance on dose, type, all these sorts of things. They'll be experts on this. And when I took her there, that was, to put it mildly, not the experience that we had of medical expertise. But that perhaps reflects a larger set of issues, that there just hasn't been much research. My mother, who's cancer is dealing with cancer, very interested in CBD, but the information just isn't out there. And some of the promise of this is, for example, opioid addiction. It is possible to get people from opioids to CBD or something like that. But there's just not been much medical research. So how do we, as the product becomes available without a background of research, how do we deal with that dilemma, with just not having information, I think, that we need to help people use this medically?
Thank you for the question. It's a really good question. I think that there's a lot of research that's going to be happening in the future, but right now, a lot of the current dispensaries all across the U.S. and the states that have it legal don't have a lot of expertise because the research doesn't exist. But here's a little light, shining light in the future. UCLA just put together a cannabis institute. They're starting to do research on CBD. The name of the doctor there is Jeffrey Chen. He's a very knowledgeable doctor. He is isolating the cannabinoids, all of the different ones, because right now when you take CBD, you take what's called full spectrum, but there's many cannabinoids in CBD, and what he's trying to do is isolate. CBD 10 works with lupus, CBD 12 works with epilepsy, so that we're not just over here ingesting CBD, all of it, when we don't have to. So we know that research is coming out, over the course of the next few years. I would also tell you that if you go to a medical dispensary and they don't have a good medical staff, leave the dispensary. For us in California, our bud tenders are trained on all of the different strains, hybrids, indicas, sativas. We are trained on the different CBD products that we carry. So if you would come to our dispensary, we'd be able to tell you based on what your illness is, what we recommend for you based on our knowledge. Also, there's a gentleman here in New York City. His name is Joe Dolce. He and Dr. Chin, Chin, have put together an amazing medical school around marijuana. It's all online. It's to teach all of the medical bud tenders and now the adult use bud tenders about how to help patients understand what they're ingesting and how much they should take. And I just went through that whole thing maybe about 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to use it for all my bud tenders in Oregon and in California because it's really very good. What I would tell you is that there is people that out there that do know. I'm one of those people, so I'm happy to talk to you at any time. And to know that because this is coming into the mainstream, we're just behind. But really, there's going to be a plethora of information, I would say, in the next 5 years, but especially when they federally decriminalize it and it gets off the Schedule I. Because the problem is that people who do research are only a very few because you have to be granted the permission to do that by the federal government. The other problem is that you're only able to use marijuana grown in this one college in Mississippi, and it's terrible. It has mold and pesticides, so it's not really good for research. So these are things that hopefully when it comes down to Schedule II, more people will have access to do research on really good, farmed marijuana.
Okay, let's hear from an onion farmer in Orange County, Paul Ruskowitz.
Paul Ruskowitz, County Legislator, Orange County, also a farmer. My question is for Ben. You mentioned the high labor input in growing hemp. Not only labor, but it's also, a very expensive crop to grow. And earlier you mentioned about how as production increases, you expect the value to come down. That labor input isn't going to change. And as you probably know, one of the biggest challenges for agriculture right now is a reliable, affordable workforce. So in the future, as the value comes down, what about some of the other inputs in terms of seed and cultivation? In other words, what do you see for the future profitability of this crop?
Sure. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. There are some mechanized hemp harvesters, modified tobacco harvesters coming out of Kentucky now. There are some extraction systems where they just freeze the hemp right out of the field without drying. All the bugs aren't worked out, but like most industry, there are some larger scale opportunities coming, but the faster those come, the faster the price will drop. As sort of us farmers' conundrum. So we will see some savings, but also a correlated price drop as those systems come into place. I do especially see for irrigation, it's like a crop that you use drip irrigation. So you look at a very similar cost in irrigation as you would to a crop you'd use drip irrigation. And right now, seed costs are around $1,500 an acre. Those, I think, will be dropping by as soon as next year. And we're working on a breeding program to develop strains that are localized to New York State, but we need to produce a few more generations. But I think within 2 years, we'll see a lot more like folks like us and others coming on as seed producers. I think that price will cut in half. And then there are also, even in our drying system, I should add the caveat that I'm drying twice as much this coming year and keeping the same size crew. Just so you can work economies of scale and efficiency, but I do think generally there are many things coming that'll cut our production costs, but correlating to that is we'll see more hemp on the market and prices dropping too. So everywhere, I hope that helps you with it's not a direct answer, but there's mechanization coming for larger scale operations, and there are lower input costs coming, but I think that's all going to correlate with lower hemp prices as well.
Good morning. Thank you all for this great panel. I'm really interested in the economic aspects of legalization of marijuana, but one of the things we haven't touched on today is the social justice aspect of the legalization of marijuana. And I'm wondering if our panelists from California, Massachusetts, where there's experience in this area, if you can give us some information on what you've seen with regards to social justice, both from the expungement of old criminalization records or decrease in jail populations, decrease in recidivism as we find alternatives for opioid addictions, et cetera. Anything that you can talk to on that?
Well, thank you for that great question. Actually, for us, we have some top lines that we have put together and hope to submit during the comment section that we're in right now. And here's a few of them, if you don't mind me sharing with you. We really believe there should be equitable access at the beginning of this industry. And what that means is that there should be pathways from the informal economy into the formal economy. As I like to tell people all the time, there's no way that a cannabis industry can be healthy unless it looks at its past mistakes. And so part of that is the vacature of all of the cannabis offenses that folks who are currently sitting in prison. So that's in the budget, so they're going to vacate all those, but we need to have a way for them to get housing, to get job training, so they can enter the market. Some of your greatest growers are sitting in a jail right now. Some of your greatest, dispensaries are sitting in jails right now. They're about to come out here, and they're really, really good. They've been working in the informal market for a long time. So how do we bring them into the formal market? We feel like there should be equitable access to licenses. Looks like they're looking at about 500 licenses across the state. 86% of the people in your prisons right now are in there for some type of cannabis offense. So we propose 86% of those should go to people who have been affected by the war on drugs. Incubators, we are really advocating for incubators to help people get set up, especially small businesses. The large corporations like Canopy or like Aurora out of Canada, they have plenty of money to do that, but a lot of your small farmers here, your small distributors or small manufacturers are not going to have the same access to capital that these larger groups are going to have. So in order to make sure that we have a robust industry that has both small and large companies, we're really recommending that. And then, of course, community oversight for the Cannabis Commission. One of the biggest things that was a big fail for us in California is that by the time we in the informal market understood what was happening, they had already put together their advisory board, and none of the people in their advisory board were from a cannabis industry. So they met all of this regulation, and the regulation that really strangled small cultivators in like Sonoma and Humboldt, Mendocino counties who have had generations, like 30 years of experience in growing from generation to generation, who are not in existence anymore because the regulation didn't consider the small farmer. And then we really feel like there should be no recriminalization. So you can't decriminalize something and say, but we're gonna recriminalize it in this different way. And I say that because one of the things is that in California, we had $300 million in sales tax in the very first, and that was supposed to be redistributed to community, except the police came and asked for 60% of it. And we asked them why. They asked for 60% of the funds, and they said, well, we have to do enforcement. And when we were like, but it's legal, so what are you enforcing? And they were like, well, all of the underground market. And I understand that. I think that's something that we are used to as a society, but what if we use 60% of that to help the small folks who are in the informal economy transition to the formal economy? And I think specifically with cannabis, we have to start thinking of it in a different way so that we don't recriminalize the people that we've been criminalizing for the last 80 years.
Yes.
Hi, Nancy Montgomery, Putnam County Legislator and Phillipstown Communities That Care Drug Coalition. And I have questions for everybody as I'm trying to understand this conversation is regarding the adult use of marijuana, recreational use. A lot of the focus, I think, has still been on the medical use, which we've already done here in New York. CBD and hemp is medical use. I'm just trying to differentiate the terms. There's cannabis, there's hemp, there's CBD. Is CBD for medical use, or is that for recreational use? Both. Okay.
It's used for both, but what it is with CBD is that you don't have the psychoactive part of what happens when you're using THC. So a lot of people do use it for medical, but some people use it because maybe they're feeling fatigued that day. It can be a lot of different things, but it will be on both sides.
So recreational use treats fatigue.
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I was saying. This is why I was saying earlier when I spoke was that you have to not separate. It's hard for me when people separate it because what we find is even in adult use, people are treating something. One of the stories I like to tell about our dispensary in California is I had a very young gentleman, probably 22, 23, come into the store and he's like, I want the highest THC you've got. And I'm like, well, we can sell that to you and I will sell it to you because we can legally do so. I said, but I want you to go home and think about why you need to be so high. He's like, well, I'm partying. I'm like, no. I want you to think about it. And when he came back, again, he said, they call me Miss Chris in California, and they're like, Miss Chris, I figured out why I need to be so high. And I said, well, what was it? And he's like, I'm very anxious. And I'm like, oh. I said, well, then you're taking the wrong marijuana. You took a sativa. Sativa will make you more anxious. So what we're going to look for you so that you feel comfortable and not be so anxious is a indica dominant hybrid, which will calm you down, allow you to function in your regular world, and still have the same effect. So even people who think they're doing adult use, they're actually trying to treat something. And I find that to be 95% of my clients, even people who are just coming in who don't think about what's happening in their personal world and where they need this plant.
And are there people trained in, medical training that in these dispensaries that have the knowledge to treat these recreational uses of fatigue and anxiety?
And PTSD and depression. So in our Portland store, we have nurses that are legally trained around these products. And we have what's called Converse with a Nurse, which allows people to come in and talk to the nurse and find out medicinally. And what we try to do, especially in our dispensary, because we are about wellness and healing more than we are about party on, so we try to make sure that we have those people on staff so that if there's somebody who might need some extra attention, they have that.
And Cheryl, you're finding that there are medically trained people in Massachusetts in your dispensaries for recreational use?
Yes, and again, I think this goes to what Ben said before, is you really need to do your research and really experience this with a reputable dispensary. And there are many regulations in Massachusetts for dispensaries that require a lot of knowledge, and we do have training programs as well.
Just quick, because the use of marijuana related to alcohol, does Massachusetts have any social host laws regarding marijuana as we do with alcohol? You know how we develop a social host?
Right, and its impairment is what it basically is. And
But it's related to alcohol. Does it have any specific laws regarding marijuana social host laws? If you're a parent and your kid's using your legal marijuana in your home like they do with alcohol, do you have any laws regarding that?
We are working on those right now. That's something that a committee of the Cannabis Control Commission is looking at right now.
Sir.
Okay, Charlie Ripley, Cook County Legislature. My question is for Ben. But before I get into my question, I can tell you that after 24 years in the Marine Corps, I am totally against this. However, I see the benefit for the state to come up with the sales tax money. But I'm also a farmer, and am very concerned about water quality. So what is the pesticides that you might be using to help farm your crops? Is there anything that we need to be informed of on that?
It's a great question. I'm an organic farmer, so I use no pesticides, no herbicides. But it's a great question because cannabis is a bioaccumulator. So if you have excess heavy metals, such as arsenic, mercury, or even too much zinc, the plant will accumulate that. And through the extraction process, that can end up in the extracts. So rigorous testing to make sure that, from my company's perspective, CBD is safe and actually effective. You don't want heavy metals in there. So and also pesticides are some of the hardest things to extract out. So some of the leading regulations oppose the use of any pesticide on the cannabis plant that aren't organic because of exactly that. It's a bioaccumulator, and because you're extracting it down, these chemicals and metal compounds are some of the hardest to get rid of. So again, from a personal perspective, I don't worry about what I'm spraying, but I'm very careful about what soil we use. For example, on our farm, we have an area that used to be an orchard, but that has a lot of arsenic and mercury in it, so I don't plant on that ground. So as a farmer, it's very important to A, understand your underlying soil quality and tests and presence of metals, and B, that pesticides and herbicides on cannabis don't mix well, especially per the state's testing guidelines.
Everyone, a warm welcome for our panel here. Thank you very much.